Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Culture by Numbers, where we focus on how data geeks meet pop culture. We dive deep into ways that marketers, data scientists, and ad practitioners can collaborate with brands looking to utilize tools for performance. Today, we're going to discuss the nature of the current Hispanic voice, what matters to them most, and how brands and markets can engage them successfully. Recently, Variety magazine published an article about measuring the TV and video content viewership of Hispanic households in the U.S. So I thought it could be relevant and topical to better understand an important demographic of our population. And we're very privileged today to have Sylvia Feliz and Felix Tejeda as our panel of experts. Sylvia is a veteran leader of multicultural advertising and media strategy at WPP, the world's largest ad agency with $18.7 billion in revenues. She's advised global Fortune 100 brands like Coca-Cola and L'Oreal on multicultural media strategies and go-to-market execution, and started her career calling on Hispanic households to join Arbitron, now Nielsen Audio's consumer panel, to research listener data on radio broadcasting influences. Felix is also a seasoned multicultural brand marketing lead in the telecom space, having led marketing strategies at Virgin Mobile, consumer segmentation at T-Mobile, Sprint, and Nextel, and e-commerce growth, retention, and upgrades at Verizon Wireless, with a whopping 115% sales growth year over year in the early 2000s. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
So let's talk about the state of Hispanic households. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, 1 in 4 Americans will be Latino in coming years, and the share of young households headed by someone Hispanic is projected to triple from 1990 to 2040. And the U.S. Census Bureau projects the Hispanic population will reach 111 million by 2060, which is about 28% of the U.S. population. So I wanted to ask both of you, what are your thoughts about the state of the Latino population? Where's the growth coming from, and what will their needs be?
I'm going to take that. So I would say that it is growing very fast. 53% of the Gen Alpha identify as non-white, and those are people under 18, and already 25% of Gen Z are Hispanic. So the growth is coming from U.S. birth, both from immigrant parents and U.S.-born parents. So a lot of the families, we have larger families, and that's what's impacting the growth.
Right. So it's going to be impossible to ignore this huge demographic in terms of their future needs of banking, services, education, housing, buying cars. If you're an insurance provider, you're going to have multiple beneficiaries under the same household, and you might need a larger mortgage if it's a household with intergenerational domicile. So
exactly.
I think it's very critical to understand the future of this population. Given that we're all marketers and we've worked together on various projects, one of the fundamental factors as a data analyst was that media planning is about understanding audiences, and an accurate forecast includes accurate data. Historically, at least on the cable broadcasting and linear side, Nielsen has been the go-to barometer for measurement of TV and video viewing habits. Have either of you used Nielsen or other measurement vendors before? What do you look for in terms of making recommendations to your clients?
In the media industry, at least as part of my work throughout the years, we do rely heavily on Nielsen and Comscore from a digital standpoint. That is the standard across the industry, but there are new partners that are coming up too. From a transactional perspective, we heavily rely on Nielsen.
Right. And that's why we just came off of the Super Bowl ads, which were worth $8 million for 30 seconds, because people say even with social media, it's challenging to have 128 million people tune in simultaneously to a national cultural event. And therefore, Nielsen's always been the currency of trade and measurement for agencies. And that's how publishers and content providers negotiate their rates, even with the emergence of new entrants with new media. I guess that's why I wanted to shift a little bit into where are the areas of new media. What are the recent trends about what Latinos watch? And what can we tell marketers about Latino values?
From a media consumption perspective, it's all moving to streaming. pretty much all digital. You mentioned social media, right? Still hard to get all that scalability in from a social perspective. So a lot of the viewing is going to streaming because you can access that whenever you want at the time that you want, wherever you are. It's not limited to your own home, and it's on the go. And a lot of this new generation, that's how they're living their life. It's on the go, and as marketers, that's where you want to reach them wherever they are, not just necessarily in the living rooms, but the living room TV, broadcast TV still plays a large role in the viewing habits, because for those specific entities like the Super Bowl, especially any sports, football, soccer, boxing matches, all these things, all the sports, any temple events, the Latin billboards, Latin Grammys, you have to watch them live in order to get that essence. And that's when the family viewing does come together.
Speaking of coming together, is it about talent competitions or the romantic telenovelas? Is it in language or in English? What would you say about what genre?
It is everything, right? Because the content is out there, and because we can access it anywhere we want. At this point, it could be in Spanish, it could be in English. In my household, we watch a lot of Korean telenovelas, and we love it. It's like, I feel like Netflix thinks we're Korean, because all our recommendation is, let's watch another
K-drama. I know.
I love it. We go back and forth between the K-dramas, any other sporting event that is happening, or any other music, especially when it comes to cultural events. That's when we do come together and do watch it on the broadcast side.
How about you, Felix? If you were to advise a brand marketer, do you think it's worth it to invest in Hispanic Heritage Month? I know in 2024 is called Pioneers of Change and Shaping the Future Together, which acknowledges the prior generations and encouraging the youth on the resilience and unity of the Hispanic experience. What are some of the key themes that you would recommend brand marketers who are targeting Hispanic populations should be aware of and really keep track of?
At the end of the day, it has to be authentic, right? It has to be able to cut across multiple households, different backgrounds. You're Colombian, Puerto Rican, Dominican, right? There has to be some nuance within each of the stories that are being told, that we, the people consuming the media, can say, that's me, that's us. I know somebody just like that, right? So I think the day is all about authenticity. There's a lot of unique stories that on paper don't work, but yet you're able to put it on the screen, and somehow, some way, it makes a connection across culturally. And so I think at the end of the day, like every other type of marketing, especially brand marketing, it just has to feel authentic to the people you're talking to.
In terms of key things, how would you place the importance of family values? Even when you were doing work for T-Mobile, for Sprint, for Verizon, has there always been about, calling your friends and family back home in DR or Puerto Rico or wherever?
Very much so. Right? Family values was always a key aspect of the environment. I think what's important, though, is that it doesn't become sort of like just a simple stamp and a placeholder, right? So what I mean by that is, when you're developing creative ideas, and I work with amazing people, is that the family setup that they put together on the portfolio, maybe it's not necessarily kids playing soccer and the abuela doing the cooking, right? But there must be some nuance that could be picked up in terms of the framing, in terms of the communication, what's important for that family, and definitely always being in touch 24/7, having that ability also to dial internationally has always been a long time a piece of any value proposition that was in telecom. But the value of the family has always had to be with, I need to be able to call, my loved ones at the drop of a hat, per se.
Sylvia, I'm going to ask you what your favorite brand campaign has been to support family values, but just to reiterate and support that with some data and facts, I researched that according to the U.S. Census, households of Hispanic origin have the largest average household size at 3.22 people, which is certainly larger than the comparative non-Latino household, which has an average of 3.15 people. And in fact, Guatemalan, Salvadoran, and Mexican American families all have an average family size of more than 4 people. So do you have any examples of ad campaigns that you felt have really addressed this idea of the family values in the households?
I do. I have actually two examples. The first one is from Dasani. It's called Happens Between Sips. And the ad just start with the dad playing basketball outside with his daughter. And then they go back into the living room. And in the living room, they have the grandparents dancing. So going to back to what Felix said, it's not just having the grandma just cooking, like they were being their authentic self, dancing. Then they take the smaller child. It was a boy. The grandma was dancing with him, trying to teach him how to dance. It's a great spot. Definitely connected with me on various levels. The other one is the bank. They also did one specifically for children that support their parents when they are going to healthcare providers and they don't know English. So it's called the translators. That ad just also hit home with me, and it resonated so well, me personally, because I go through that situation with my parents all the time.
Well, yeah, I could totally relate because I have parents in their 80s, and when they go to a medical doctor visit, they just say, oh, it hurts. And they don't not able to translate the physical diagnostics of it's fatigue or something else. So I, as the second generation, have to be able to relay the old culture versus new culture and translating my intuitive understanding of their values with the medical technical aspects of helping them achieve better health. But so speaking of old and new, let's talk about new media and old media. Is old media dead with Latinos? You mentioned earlier that streaming is important, but recently there's been this commentary that young males have been an untapped resource and have been overlooked in driving the national agenda and outcome of the shape of our culture due to Joe Rogan and other non-mainstream media podcasts. So where do you see the areas of growth for influencing young Latinos, in particular young Latino males? Do they have role models? Who is influencing them?
No, that's a great question. Very timely, so right? Because we just had an election where there were some demographics, specifically male skew, that went one way versus the other. And so there was a lot of discussion as to how do you reach this group. But I came across a TED talk by Scott Galloway. He's a professor at NYU. And he started sharing some data about, the feeling of how this generation of males observing the media. They cannot be like their fathers and grandfathers. They're coming into a new world where they have to now behave differently. So they're navigating these new rules in society and media and everything else. And so what's happening is that they are unclear as to the path. They are unclear as to how to forge relationships. And so the benefit of that is there are amazing opportunities to help shape how they feel or how they should, approach life. For example, there's a lot of Stoic philosophers that has picked up the last few years. And so a brand, maybe someone like Nike, has to take into consideration not just the fact that it is, you are potentially a fashion brand, but what role you play in the confidence of a young man? What role do you play as a brand in terms of what are the good aspects, to aim for, right? And so I think folks like Galloway and some others folks like that are, truly digging into the data are raising the flags, but I think there's the opportunity to take those and guide them in the right direction.
I think that's so important. I remember an ad campaign where the brief from the agency was to target the modern male, and we had no data to support that. It was emotionally intelligent, progressive, sensitive, all these qualitative factors, let alone interpreting that for a Latino population, I think can be very challenging. If there were to be a Latino male role model, do you have any suggestions or ideas?
That comes to my mind, it's Bad Bunny. From the things that he has accomplished as a male artist with a genre that is very rooted in Puerto Rico, and he took it to the world, especially with his last album. I would also say overall, from an accomplishment perspective and what he has done, he's showing this new generation how to be your authentic self. From a family values perspective, I would say Messi. He's the number one sports person in soccer, actually any sports in the world. But his family values, he has his wife, his two daughters, and he just lives for his family. It's a great example, not just the Hispanic community, but everybody that follows him.
Hispanic content is so global. There is a diaspora of Spanish-speaking folks all over the world who've immigrated and who've established themselves. Do you think that Hispanics listen to content that originates in Latin America or here in the United States? I think what comes to mind, actually, Lin-Manuel Miranda, I think before Hamilton, he had a musical that was based in Spanish Harlem, and that was all in English with a cast that was of Latino origin.
That's a good point. And if I may add, in terms of the male role models out there, right? We do have several role models out there. It is very difficult to go beyond sports. For example, Kat in New York, Al Horford in Boston. If you follow his wife, who was Miss República Dominicana, she's always attending the games. When he comes out, he has like 5, 6 kids. When he comes out, they're right there. Bad Bunny is very interesting because the music did not lend itself to be translated as a role model. But I do give him credit, even though I'm not a huge fan, because he has taken it to a level where he's big enough that can do more, Puerto Rico specifics, storylines. Before it was more world music and he was just in the SNL 50. And I think that's amazing. And you have a cast member that he's half Cuban, half Dominican. And then you have Pascal from the fame of The Mandalorian. There are some role models, but I think we need more of it, right? In terms of the media, what's interesting is that if you think back in terms of the original content that was like in Univision, a lot of that content was either copying whatever's happening in general market or were flavors or shows that were happening in Latin America that they just brought into the stage. So, for example, one of the most popular shows ever was Sábado Gigante. Well, that gentleman started that show actually in Chile and brought it back in and then became #1 TV show in the U.S. What's happening in the podcast world from a Spanish perspective is, they're taking the most popular radio shows and turning those into a little bit more of content, stretching the value. But what you do see, because of what Sylvia mentioned in terms of we can consume whatever we like because it's on the internet nowadays, there will be some see and say in terms of the content. We'll see how popular that is, how much, it is covered. I do say that the flavor that's coming in from Latin America, you get a lot of unique authenticity. And so I think I look forward to the future, start diversifying, and you get some real value, because that's where the dollars are, is getting the views and getting the continuation of that. So right now, my understanding is we're still getting our feelers out there about what works, right? What drives views, and that's because that's what brands are going to attach themselves to. And so the content is, it's growing, and I look forward to it.
What I'm hearing you both say is there's an appetite for authenticity and going back to the origins of your culture. Growing up, I was embarrassed about Korean content, but now it's like Blackpink, BTS. There's suddenly a national pride of going back to the old country and finding content from there. Not only is there an appetite for Latinos to consume Latino content from DR or PR and influencing the youth, but even crossover because it is a multicultural.
Yeah, Bad Bunny is getting criticized because some of the music that he's making is not a purist music. He's blending some sounds here and there. I love salsa, and I've heard a couple of people say that's not real salsa. He's messing a little bit with it, but I've also heard he's bringing attention to the music. And if I can get somebody who's never heard salsa or never bought salsa music or never been to a club and never danced or whatever, and if that's the reason, that's the gateway that they learn about this, then God bless, right? So in terms of the authenticity, as long as you stay authentic to what you're doing, you let it ride the wave.
Okay. So then in terms of year-round media planning, I think in a previous podcast on this series, one of my guests said we should look beyond tentpole marketing events like Black History Month or any other Heritage Month, because people of color consume brands all year, not just on a specific day or specific month. What do you think about that in terms of how brands should better understand Latinos? Is it really about focusing on getting the biggest bang for your buck when you have the eyeballs, or is it having an always on strategy?
It has to be a balance, and definitely always on as much as you can. Like you said, we don't just consume media during Hispanic Heritage Month. We are 100% Latinos, and we are 100% Americans for those of us that have been here for a long time. That never stops. And the majority of the U.S. Latinos right now are bilingual. Depending on the source, anywhere from 65% to 68% say that all U.S. Hispanics are Latinos, are bilingual. So I would say that a balance of always on and obviously those heavy up moments when culture are at the top of your mind, even more so than ever. This new generation of Gen Zs and Gen Alphas are reclaiming their origins and are going back to their roots. There is a need to learn even Spanish, the words and the lingo that all our countries of origins, we all speak Spanish, but they're these specific words that each country has, and they want to learn about that. They want to learn more about their food. They want to learn more about their grandmas and all those things. So heritage and going back to their culture is key. So therefore, though that needs to be carried out not just through Hispanic Heritage Month, but throughout the entire year.
I see. So it's layers of immersion. You might have these stereotypes of the abuela cooking and the soccer star and then the family, but really it's getting deeper dive into the nuances of all of those different of the culture and learning more about it. And I think Felix, you and I were even talking before about like Mother's Day. Like, should we just celebrate Mother's Day one day of the year because mothers are mothers the whole year, right? So should we take away spending on Mother's Day?
It might be a little controversial to say something like that, but the reason we have Black History, Black Heritage Month and Hispanic Heritage Month is not because we don't believe it's spread out throughout the year, but it's more so a way to celebrate it so that all the people can partake into our culture, right? You know, my first thought when I heard stuff like that was, oh, do we do away with Mother's Day? Because we should celebrate, you know, our mothers every single day. We literally alive because they gave us life. So I understand the argument. But going back to your point in terms of immersion, in terms of what Sylvia was saying in terms of balance, look, if you have $10 to spend on your media budget, you have to look at your business model. You have to look at your seasonality. You have to look at how it will impact your business if you spend those $10 just in 1 month. So it would be smart to spend it wherever you believe the brand should spend it at, where it has the most impact from a revenue perspective, because you know what? Once you do that, well, next time you get $20 to spend on the media. And then you're able to invest in the media, invest in the value, invest in your segment. And that's the way that you get your returns. Because I've always said at the end of the day, you have to be able to show an ROI on how you invest your money. Because at the end of the day, it's a limited amount of dollars that are being spent and invested on segments. And so if the money is right, put up or shut up, right? If I'm able to implement a media strategy that combines authenticity plus content, and I'm able to target it strategically, then you need to be able to invest further dollars, right? And so that's this discussion to have. So it's not that I'm arguing to take away Mother's Day. All I'm saying is, if something is truly valuable, then you really put your full thought behind it, and then you really do it 365, right? Again, at the end of the day, it does have to apply based on the business strategy, right? If your business relies on that, then you have to be able to support it.
And can I add to that? Because consumers nowadays, they're very smart as well. So they will see when you're showing up. So if you just show up for Hispanic Heritage Month and you're out and then you come back the next year, they're going to call you out. So that's why the balance is necessary. Create that relationship so then at the end of the day, you get your results, your return on your investment.
Right. So speaking about smart and speaking about being authentic and showing up, the future of marketing seems to include AI. Like in another previous podcast, we talked about the infinite benefits of efficient personalization with the example that Dominicans are very different from Colombians or different from Puerto Ricanos. So do you have an example of how Latinos are united and how they are different from each other and the role of AI in operational efficiency so they can be smarter for all of those differences?
So it's a complex subject. Because my understanding is that you are able to, in essence, build biases depending on what data you include in AI, right? So making this up, you create some type of AI planning tool that says, yeah, I want to get 10% of Colombians, 10% of this, 10% of that. Unless you are able to input some data, some layers, some filters that talks to what you are going after in terms of what you're connecting with, what is your insight? And so you have to be super mindful in terms of that. The one thing that does connect all the diaspora of the Hispanic culture is a struggle. The idea that you come into this country as, unique. You are Colombian, you are Dominican, you are from Venezuela, you are from Cuba, whatever. But the moment you arrive in this country, now you are put in another group for Hispanics, right? So as a marketer, you have to be able to not just look at data, but you have to be able, what does that mean? Right? To be able to create insights and pull out insights and ideas. One thing that I'll never forget, and this is what I mean by somebody who was born outside of the country but then resides in the U.S. I remember a long time ago I saw a video because Celia Cruz did a show in Guantanamo Bay. And if you know Guantanamo Bay, or it's basically a part in Cuba where the U.S. has a base, I literally saw her reach under the fence and grab some sand. And she just put it in her hand like this. And I'm sorry, but if you're Latino, you know what that means. So those are the little threads that you have to be able to build into your creative, into your media. The other example is people used to come over the agency and sell properties, right? And you knew who actually understood the content versus not. And what I mean by that, somebody will come over and say, yeah, we got the new lineup for, the fall. We got this novella. It does really well with this demographic, blah, blah, blah. Another person comes in and goes, hey, did you know that so-and-so that was in such and such show is not going to do this? And by the way, I don't know what's going on behind closed doors, but we heard this. There's flavor about that show, about that, content that's coming down that only somebody who's actually experienced it and consume it are able to tell that story. So I think when it comes to AI, at the end of the day, you're going to need some people like us to be able to decipher otherwise. If you just go by metrics, if you just go by analytics, then all you're going to be able to say is, okay, which shows does well with everybody, but you're not going to be able to connect it, at an emotional level. So, AI has its values in terms of efficiencies, what it can do for certain processes. But when it comes to having some real flavor behind it, I don't think you should worry about AI for a very, very long time.
Because I'm so glad you bring that up.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's all about being the human aspect. Yeah. There are some benefits to it, right? And I will be lying if I told you exactly how we're going to use it in the future, because as far as I understand it, we're just creating this technology. The user cases that are coming forth, there's things that we have not even understood yet. So, and again, tying back to being, for the Hispanic culture, it's about authenticity, it's about flavor. No algorithm is gonna tell you. The only thing the algorithm does is, correlate, right? It says, okay, if you listen to Bad Bunny, if you watch those TV shows, then, you should be a good candidate for something on, some of the streaming services, right? Simple example. And then a brand can attach themselves to something like that. But you still need the human aspect to understand, do I even want to be in that show, right? And that content or et cetera, attach that make that connection to a brand. Very interesting work. It's a lot of challenges. I'm looking forward to learning a lot more than what's out there.
In terms of AI, we all speak Spanish, right? But we all come from different countries and we all have different accents. So from a creative standpoint, AI would be great in order to kind of replicate whatever accent the Puerto Ricans have, Dominicans, Colombians, Cubans, and Argentinians. All of that is very helpful. Back to what Felix says, that human essence, that flavor, only a human can give it in real life. Like there's no comparison and there's no replacement for that.
There you go. So AI for creative copy testing and experimentation. When it comes down to depth of understanding the nuances, you still have to have that human element overlay to fully understand the human need and the human interest.
And just for somebody who's not familiar with what is being said, the same word can mean one thing in one country and mean something totally different in another country. Same word. And so how it's being used, not just colloquially, but also to tell stories, that's something that you can translate the same sentence in different accents, but the sentence may have a different takeaway depending on which country, where the person is coming from. I had an issue in one of my projects where we name a product X, and it turned out that X was understood and taken differently, and we ended up replacing some POS stuff that was already almost arriving at the store. So that happened with something very simply. It will absolutely happen with AI, and what they'll tell us is just a bug that they're working on. But that's why, to both of your points, it's not just translation; it's also understanding the culture itself.
Exactly.
So, any final words before we conclude our session for today?
We all are marketers, in a diverse world. So let's just make sure that culture is at the forefront of everything that we do, because as I mentioned before, in my household, we love K-dramas, but we're Hispanic. At the end of the day is culture. Everybody's open to culture and learning about new cultures. So let's just make sure that marketers understand that we are now living in a diverse world.
Well, that's why this podcast series is called Culture by Numbers. It's like looking at the evidence in order to demystify and understand that fabric much better. So thank you both for this conversation. I learned a great deal about what's driving this population, the challenges that lie ahead for marketers to truly understand the depth of the nuances, and how you cannot get away with just showing up once or twice a year. You got to be there all the time and balance your investment in terms of your brand outreach. So thank you both for your time today. I look forward to any feedback and conversation from the viewers.
Thank you for having us.